Do we know who that is? It's Vladimir Putin, president of Russia. He's been busy lately. In addition to filling up the internet with pictures of himself riding bizarre things, and yes, that is him riding a Ritz cracker, he's got a new hobby. He's meddling in the elections of foreign countries. You know, we have all different hobbies. That's his hobby. And that's what I'm going to talk with you today about, is this meddling in the U.S. and other elections. But before I get too deep into this, I do want to tell you what I'm not going to be talking about. I'm not going to be talking about collusion. So we're not going to talk about the degree or whether the Trump administration was cooperating, colluding, whatever word you want to say, with Russia in this endeavor. So that means that there's going to be, this is the only picture of Trump and Putin on a horse together, shirtless, that you're going to see. There's going to be no discussion of Carter Page and his affliction for terribly ugly hats. And there's going to be it's hard to see, no discussion of George Papadopoulos and the secrets that he likes to, the drunken secrets that he likes to share with Australian diplomats. And don't get me wrong, the collusion is an important story. It's a big story. It's a fascinating story. I spent a lot of time thinking about it. But our obsession with the collusion, I think, has clouded our ability to see what's going on, the focus and perspective on the original crime and the most prominent villain, who I would argue is Vladimir Putin. We've become so obsessed with collusion that we can't talk about anything else. And we have competing claims about collusion. Oh, Trump colluded. No. Hillary was the real colluder. Well, maybe if we have a memo, right? If we have a memo talking about it, well, then maybe we should have another memo. Maybe a well-crafted tweet will clear all this up. No, it's not going to happen. I think at some point there will be clarity, and we will know whether or not there was collusion, and if so, who was involved. But I will tell you what we know with absolute certainty is that a foreign power intervened in our election. They developed a strategy to cause chaos, to make us question our own democratic institutions, and to turn us against each other. That absolutely happened. And all this talk about collusion, while important, has, I think, pulled us away from that most important element. So in my remaining time today, what I'm going to talk about is that. And I'm going to remind you of that and hopefully paint a picture of what Russia did. So I'll start with what Russia did. We'll talk a little bit about why they did it, and then I'll offer some reflections on what all of this means. So to understand Russia's intervention in our 2016 elections, we have to start in Sochi for the Olympics in 2014 and appreciate how important this was for Putin and Russia. So this was their return to greatness. This was their opportunity to once again say, we are a world power. This was a moment of national triumph for Russia. And if you see the pictures of Putin, he's so happy, right? Look, there he is carrying the torch, and you can see he's smiling, and you can see it in the eyes, like his eyes are happy. Putin's doing the wave, right? So this was in a major, major moment, and so I think we need to appreciate the significance of this. This was a return to greatness for Russia. This is how Russia understood it, and in particular, this is how Putin understood this. Since the collapse of the Soviet Union in the early 1990s, Russia had gone through some terrible times. This was a chance for them to come back and stamp their footprint and say, we are once again a great power. So as the Olympics are playing out, suddenly Ukraine happens. In the midst of the Olympics, a revolution breaks out in Ukraine. And you probably remember hearing a little bit about this. In the middle of the election, it was fantastic. Hundreds of thousands of people filled the streets, protesting their government, arguing, we want a better democracy. This stole all the attention from Putin's Olympics. Even worse, the individual that they were protesting was Viktor Yanukovych, who was a Russian ally, a Putin ally. And so while much of the world is celebrating what's going on there, and then ultimately the people throw Yanukovych out and he flees to Russia, while most of the world was celebrating this as a democratic act, Putin was livid. He's upset. And he sees the United States pulling the strings here. He says the United States was behind this. They were the ones that tried to rain on my Olympics, and then they tried to pull another country out of my orbit. So the Olympics was no longer getting the attention, and a close ally had shifted from us to the United States. He's very, very upset. And he sees this fitting a pattern that had played out over the last couple of years where the United States intervenes against Russian interests. So he points to Libya in 2012, where the United States supported the toppling of Muammar Gaddafi, another Putin ally. Putin apparently watched the videos of Gaddafi being killed and dragged through the streets and was just consumed by them. And you can understand why that might consume a dictator. At the same time, he saw another pattern in Moscow. Protests that broke out in Moscow in 2012 were encouraged by the United States. So he looks at what the United States did in Ukraine and says, you are doing this again. This is a pattern. You're trying to intervene and manipulate the democratic process in Russia. And not only does he blame the United States, he traces it to one person in particular, Hillary Clinton. He sees that he believes that she's behind this. She was the one that was calling for the revolution in Ukraine. She was the one that was encouraging the protesters in Moscow. Putin hates Clinton. I mean, hates. Look at this picture. Like, that's some serious manspreading, right? He does not like Hillary Clinton. So on the eve of the 2014, as the Olympics were coming to an end, and as Ukraine was slowly drifting out of Putin's orbit, he vows he's going to get revenge. He's going to get revenge against Hillary Clinton, and he's going to get revenge against the United States. That he is going to make the American democracy hurt. He's going to show that our democracy is more vulnerable than we think it can be. He's going to try to bring us down. And those on the inside say this was an absolute strategy and reaction he had to the Olympics and what happened in Ukraine. He was upset, and there was going to be vengeance. So the question is, what does he do? How does he do this? Information warfare. So historically, states have spied on each other. They've gathered information. There's nothing new to this. What Putin did, and what was different from before, is he weaponized this information. He said, I'm going to gather information, and I'm going to use it against the United States. He did this largely through this organization called the Internet Research Agency. You can see the building right there. It's located in St. Petersburg. It was funded by this guy who was known as Putin's cook. There you can see him. He's not a cook. He's not a chef, but he cooks things up for Putin. So when Putin has a problem, he goes to his cook. And his cook takes care of it. So he goes to him and says, let's create this agency. It was well funded. They brought in specialists, hundreds of specialists. They worked day and night shifts, all trying to hack and undermine the U.S. political system. It was a very sophisticated and well-organized effort. What did they do? Now, these things are probably going to be familiar to you. They hacked emails. They spread false or misleading stories. And they used social media to create political discord. And again, all of these things are going to be familiar to you, but I'm hoping that as you see them as a package, you appreciate the degree to which this was a coordinated event. So let's walk through them. Let's start with the hacked emails. Again, things that you're familiar with. There were two main batches. The first batch was the DNC, the Democratic National Committee email server. They hacked into that. They got all the emails. And the second one was John Podesta, the campaign chairman's emails. Two different batches, and we'll talk about each. For the first one, the content matters, but more important to me is when they were released. So they had all this information on the DNC. They released it, so Russia passes it to WikiLeaks. WikiLeaks releases it 2 days before the Democratic Convention. 2 days before the convention. In those emails, it was revealed that there were elements within the DNC that favored Hillary Clinton over Bernie Sanders. So you think, if you're a Bernie Sanders fan, and now you show up to this convention, and DNC emails are suggesting that the system's rigged, that there are elements that are pushing for Hillary Clinton, turns the convention into chaos. At one point, Sanders supporters walk out of the convention. There were lots of conversations about the system is rigged. Think about Putin. This is exactly what he wants. He wants us to think the system isn't fair. It's corrupt. It worked fantastically well. The convention became a bit of a circus. So the first email leak is before the convention. The second one, they saved that for a rainy day. So they held on to that for a while. And the rainy day was October 7, 2016. October 7, 2016. Now what happened? Oh, that was the day that the Access Hollywood tape dropped. They released John Podesta's emails an hour afterwards. So the Access Hollywood tape drops like a bomb, right? It's a major bomb. Many assumed that it would be the end of the Trump campaign. It wasn't. But it happens. And then the Podesta emails are released an hour later. Is that just a coincidence? No. And then what happens is over the next few weeks, they slowly begin releasing more and more of Podesta's emails, all the way up until the election. If the Access Hollywood tape was a bomb, the Podesta emails were death by 1,000 cuts, slowly and methodically attacking the Clinton administration. So you think about the way in which they use these emails to undermine the system, to create questions about the legitimacy of the process, and to attack candidates. Very, very, very effective. Secondly, they spread false or misleading news stories. And they did this through a brilliant pattern. Oftentimes, the stories would first be floated by RT, Russia Today, the Kremlin-controlled media. So they would put a story out. One of the most famous ones was about the health of Hillary Clinton. Remember all those stories about how sick Hillary was and she was collapsing and couldn't walk? Most of those began with RT. So RT puts it out there. They sort of drop it. And then they have their other media, Sputnik, also put out some stories. And then what happens? The bots, the trolls, start spreading the story, making it bigger and bigger and bigger. And then what happens over time? Well, then you have outlets on the right picking some of these stories up. It oftentimes goes to InfoWars and then to Breitbart. Right now, the story is starting to get a little momentum. It feels like a domestic American story. It doesn't feel like Russian intervention. This is America. Oftentimes, it crept into the mainstream media. So NBC News has a story about a coughing fit that Clinton has. She was coughing a lot. Something must be terribly wrong. Right? And so we see, and oftentimes the mainstream media would pick it up just because, well, a lot of people are talking about this. This seems to be a story. Yeah, it's a story because Russia made it a story. Again, very effective, very devastating. Feels like this is something that the American political system is doing, but in fact, Russia is pulling the strings. Finally, the use of social media. This maybe is their most effective one. I've got some imagery from the Mueller indictment that we can walk through and see here. So they talked about the specialists working day and night, hundreds of them working in the Internet Research Agency as trolls, connecting with bots, sending out information. Their goal, the blue underline here, is to create political intensity through supporting radical groups and users dissatisfied with the social economic situation and oppositional social movements. They're trying to find people who are angry with the system, engage with them, and spread those stories. Pick hot, divisive topics: immigration, Black Lives Matter, religious groups, engage Christian groups, engage Muslims groups. Find those who are frustrated, and let's connect and spread their angst. So it's important that we realize that while Putin, he didn't like Clinton, and he was attacking Clinton, he was attacking a lot of other candidates as well. So we see here they were trying to denigrate the Clinton campaign and Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio. The ones that they liked were Trump and Bernie Sanders. Use any opportunities to criticize Hillary and the rest, except Sanders and Trump. We support them. Right? So that was Russians saying that. We like those. And think about the ways in which Sanders and Trump were challenging the status quo. So this was a way to strike back at the system. And you can see they used lots and lots of hashtags, Trump 2016, Trumpsters United, and you can see some of the posts that they put up there. Intentionally provocative, intentionally trying to make you feel something, divisive, religious, and cultural arguments. In addition, trying to suppress the vote. So they reached out to minority groups or connected with minority groups, also third-party candidates, and said, you know what, not voting is okay. Or vote Jill Stein. We'd surely be better off without voting at all. Choose peace and vote Jill Stein. Trust me, it's not a wasted vote. American Muslims boycotting the election today. Don't need to go, you don't have to vote, and if you go, vote. Don't vote Hillary, vote Jill Stein, vote somebody else. So you think about the effect. A lot of the states were very, very close. What impact might this have had? One of the other things they did was create competing rallies. So they would help organize, they would oftentimes pick very divisive issues. They would find an anti-Islamic group and say, let's have a big rally targeting Sharia law. And then they would find a Muslim group to counter-rally at the same time, the same intersection. Create anger, mistrust, and angst. Incredibly, incredibly effective. Now, the deeper question is, did this decide the election? The reality is we don't know. Now, if you ask Donald Trump or Vice President Mike Pence, they say, no, not at all. But the reality is we don't know. It's too hard to calculate that. But you know who does think they decided the election? Vladimir Putin. One of his associates gave an interview and says, Putin he's so happy, right? He thinks he manipulated and tweaked the American election to his interest. So we can't know for certain, but he thinks he did. And this is interesting because Donald Trump tweeted something else talking about, the goal of Russia was to create discord. So he gets that. And he said, they're laughing their asses off in Moscow. I think he's right. I think he's wrong about a lot of the other stuff, and I think he's played a role in feeding on this, but absolutely Russia is looking at this saying, this worked better than we ever could have imagined. Let's think about what happened here. A foreign government attacked us, and how we responded to that attack was attacking each other. We've become more partisan, more intense, we hate the other, right? This is a really dangerous and troubling development. You want somebody to hate? I can give you somebody to hate, right? You're mad, you want to be angry, you got some anger issues. This is where it should be directed. This is the culprit who created this political dynamic or aided or amplified this dynamic that is playing out in the American political system right now. It's devastating. And I'll close on this note. One of the most beautiful things about democracy is that it's a marketplace for ideas. We float ideas out there, and good ideas rise to the top. We grapple over ideas. It's absolutely brilliant. But when you are worried about somebody else intervening and manipulating that marketplace of ideas, that's very scary. This is not something that's just scary for the United States, but should be scary for democracies around the world. Democracy is a delicate thing, and it's easy to manipulate. And we saw that Russia did that in the 2016 election. Thank you very much.